All right, now this is Module 10, which is New Manager Part 2, kind of. And in here, I want to talk about dealing with the people. And in particular, if you need to hire and need to fire. We talked about last time, you may need to let some people go. And honestly, there are some people who are better off if they're in the wrong job. They're dealing with customers, they're dealing with people, and they don't have the personality that really goes with that. Or they're frustrated. Somebody's got a PhD in philosophy, and they're in the back of a pizza place cooking pizzas, or somebody's a frustrated actor. They really need to be on a Hollywood, go out to Hollywood and become a big movie star, but they're not happy being a waiter or a waitress or something. And so there are people in the situations they're not happy, and they're better off, honestly, if they're not fitting in or they're not doing a good job, they're better off being let go. And particularly, most importantly, if they're people that are rude, discourteous, absolutely will not follow rules like smiling at customers and things like that. They need to be let go. They need to they're better off somewhere else. And as an organization, you cannot tolerate weakness. I mean, an NFL football team is only as good. I probably should use a better example. Okay, EPL football team, Serie A football team. They're only as good as their weakest back, or the weakest person on the back line. That's as good as they are. If one really weak player on the back line and you go from being a winning team to a losing team. The NFL, I was going to say, NFL defense is only as good as their weakest cornerback. So in an organization, and particularly when it affects customers, somebody that's not up to snuff is you have to let them go. Or your organization's not going to work right. So there may be people that they resent. We talk about some of the problems you had in Module 9, and you may have to let people go. It is very possible that you're going to want to change the attitude, the way things work. I think sometimes, we have a new football coach for the women's team this year, and there's a lot of changes that'll be made. There are a lot of changes to be made. We went 12 years, 11 years. I think the highest seed we ever were in any of the conferences was a 5 seed. And our athletic director and the president, they want us to win football championships, at least win our conference or host the conference tournament, things like that. And they're probably going to have to start over. There'll be a lot of, my guess is there'll be a lot of freshmen and younger players playing in place of the older players, freshmen and sophomores and stuff playing in place of the older players. Because he's got to revamp. Sometimes as a manager, you need to revamp. You need to organize, and if that means maybe you got to bring some new people in and things like that. This hiring people is a big decision for organizations. I remember one study that just kind of generally the cost of mishiring a salesperson for this one company was about $100,000. And they remember them talking about that in my sales class. I had a guest speaker in, and he talked about that regarding sales. I believe this was, I'm not sure, but I believe the company was Wallace that said that. And so it's very expensive to mishire. And for you in your career, if you do a poor job of evaluating hiring people, you will that will have a big impact on your career. And not only just on how effectively your business runs, but on how good your life is in general. Hire people who are wrong for your business, and hire people who are wrong for your business, and you will suffer for it. You will pay the price for hiring people. And the first thing, is the job application or resume. You know, you go through, you've got a bunch of applications, kind of look through them, try to determine, you know, what is a good fit. And I usually use a little bit of Socratic method here when I have in-class classes, and the students say things like, okay, you don't want people with drug, alcohol abuse problems. You don't want people with criminal records. And I hate to say not to hire somebody with a criminal record, because you know, many people have a criminal record. They just made a mistake and maybe they need a second chance. But you know, these are the kind of things. You don't want to hire people who jump jobs a lot. I mean, somebody's had a lot of different jobs and they work here for a few months and work here for a few months. That's a bad sign. You don't want to hire people who don't have the relevant experience. You want to hire people who have relevant experience. You want to hire people, you know, everything else being equal, you want to hire people with education. I think if somebody's got a PhD, if they got a PhD in education or philosophy, you know, they can't get a job in their field, and they maybe that person's not going to make a great low-level employee. So I think that education may be kind of curvilinear, where education is good. You know, a college student's better than a high school student up to a point. But particularly if you're hiring people for low-level jobs, you may not be able to require a lot of education. You may not be able to have perfect resumes. Availability. There's a line on there for when are you available. Somebody that's not going to work on the weekends, they're not much use in retailing. You know, the biggest day in retailing is Saturday. For many businesses, they're very busy on Saturday and Sunday. People have to work Friday, Saturday night, maybe not both nights, but typically people, part-time employees, work one of those 2 nights and have the other night off. So you know, if they're not available for weekends or not available for nights or things like that, then that person's going to be less valuable. So a lot of things to look at that are on the resume, but that's not really that or the job application, where they filled it out maybe electronically, or they actually came in. I think most companies still, for low-level employees, people come in and fill out a job application right there. You know, one of those paper and pencil job applications, right there inside the store or the restaurant. Let's say that they have the appropriate amount of experience, education, that everything on the resume is okay. Everything on the resume is okay. Let's assume that to start with. So I want, when we're talking about, okay, who do we want to hire, who do we want to not want to hire, I'm talking about what we want to find out, stuff we want to find out in the interview. So these are some different things that I want to find out on the interview. And you know, first of all, I have a number of them. People have a drug, alcohol, some sort of abuse relationship with drugs or alcohol, gambling, that kind of thing. Job jumpers, people who jump jobs, but they didn't put that on their resume. You know, they worked here, there, all over the place. They don't work on a resume. People who do not look right, and I don't mean that they're not attractive. I mean that they're unkempt, disheveled, dirty, sloppy looking when they come to the job interview. If they come to the job interview that way, it's not a good sign that they're going to dress appropriately when they're supposed to be working. People that are bossy and demanding. And they may not make, people that are bossy and demanding, sometimes maybe that person might make a good entrepreneur or a good, you know, they may in some situations make a good boss, although I'm not even sure about that, but they definitely do not going to make a very good low-level employee. Somebody that, you know, if you need for them to work in a job where they interact with customers and they're extremely introverted, and they're not enthusiastic or do not enjoy interacting with people, that kind of person doesn't make a very good employee, particularly now if somebody is going to work back in the dishwasher, that's okay. But somebody, you know, an extremely introverted person is probably not going to be a very good server, for example. Although I have nothing against introverted, I tend to be on the introversion side of the Myers-Briggs extrovert-introvert scale myself. People that clearly don't look like, or in the job interview, you can determine that they're not going to be competent for whatever it is that they need to do. Whatever it is that they need to do. I know we interviewed a person for a professor job here, and the Dr. Yavash was asking about. He put that he knew correspondence analysis and structural equation modeling and all this. And Yavash and I published several articles. One article, one or two. I guess one article, maybe one. We had one conference paper using correspondence analysis, and actually correspondence analysis is not any big, huge, complicated thing. It's something you do with actually very relatively simple data, yes or no data. And he asked the guy about it, and he didn't know. He actually finally admitted he really actually didn't know correspondence analysis, or what it was. He'd forgotten what it was, and he put on a resume that he was, skilled at doing correspondence analysis and other things, and that made him not believe that, and so that really irritated him, and so we ended up not hiring that particular guy. People that don't show up, little things like not showing up to the job interview on time. If they're, being punctual is really important, because if somebody's supposed to come in, or some workers are supposed to come in and they don't, and who's going to have to cover for them? Who's going to have to come in on their day off? Or you, the manager, in many cases, when employees don't show up, you may have to cover for them. They have too many responsibilities outside the job, and too many things going on in their life outside the job. Maybe this is a third job for them or second job, but they got, they're in the band, and they play on a traveling football team, on the recreational team, and they play in the band, and they do wrestling on the weekends, or they've got all these different activities. They're president of the chess club, or not any one of these things, but there's like 5 different things like this that they mention. Maybe that kind of person is not going to be really good, because so now you also, now those are the criteria, and I have a negative valence here, a negative valence here. I do want to talk a little bit about the kind of people we do want to hire, and some things that you might not think about. We do want to hire people that I always felt like that I want somebody that's a little bit hungry, somebody that actually wants to get hours, somebody that needs the job. If somebody comes in and their husband is a doctor, and he makes $150,000 a year, and she's just looking for a part-time job to get out of the house. First time they need a vacation, or you call that person on a day that they're not scheduled to work, and ask them if they are free to come into work to make a little extra money, they're not going to be interested in making a little extra money. So I would like to have people that really need or want the job. So people who don't really need or have a strong desire for the job that's another type of person I don't want to hire. Also, like to hire people friendly, enthusiastic, seem like they like people, and they want to they want to be a good person, and a good employee, and want things to work out well and correctly. So people who have a positive attitude about life. And as I break these up for y'all, and on the test study guide, you'll know that I have 4 criteria that are kind of the professor's criteria. And those, at least 3 of those, will definitely be on the test. And then there'll be some other criteria that you get to pick. Any of the other things, the bossy and demanding, unkempt, disheveled, that kind of thing, that you get to pick, that are going to be on that's going to be on the exam that you get to talk about. So the main ones to focus on first are the 4 that I have. You have to know all 4 of those, because I'm going to pick 3 of these. For the others, I think I'm going to let you pick. So I have professor picks or professor's criteria, and then I've got kind of student criteria. So you get to pick 3 or 4, and I'll pick 3 or 4. criteria on which to talk about. So you want people to have a good attitude. You do not want people to have a bad attitude. And honestly, this is a situation. The workplace is a situation where one bad apple does tend to spoil the whole bunch. Where the people who have a bad or a negative attitude tend to infect other people with their vicissitudes, their opinions, and their feelings, and that negativity tends to cross over into other people. So we definitely do not want to hire people who have a bad attitude. We want people who have good communication skills. And I think part of that communications, when I say good communication skills, people who smile a lot when they talk and seem friendly, approachable, enthusiastic. We want people that are like that. We do not want people with poor communication skills. Now that being said, we live in an area where people have very thick accents. And they grew up in families where many of the people that go to this university, many of y'all grew up in families where people were not college educated, a lot of first-time college students. Some of y'all that are watching the video that are in class, maybe first-time college students, the first of your, and your parents did not go to college, your grandparents did not go to college. And you grew up around people who spoke English incorrectly. And you have a lot of grammatical mispronunciations and make a lot of grammatical errors when you speak. I don't necessarily think that an occasional grammatical error is, or a thick country accent, is necessarily a negative thing. It's whether you can express your thoughts or what you're trying to say into spoken English that really matters. And if it's particularly true, for now, if we're dealing with customers. If you're hiring somebody for a dishwashing job, communication skills do not matter very much. I think you would agree with me, for the most part, if I was to survey most of y'all who work, say, in a restaurant and said, okay, what are the communication skills of the person that does, of the people who do dishwashing, and they would not be very good, or at least their English communication skills would not be very good. So that doesn't matter. But I'm talking about people who deal with customers. We do not want to hire people who have poor communication skills, who cannot express themselves, who are chronically poorly pronunciate or poorly enunciate the words that they use. So poor communication skills is one. Unable to complete thoughts or to express themselves clearly to other people. Do not want to hire people who are, this is my criterion number 3. Do not want to hire people who are dishonest. This is particularly a huge issue in hiring people, say, to work in a retail, like a regular retail store, because the people who are dishonest will steal from you. And many of our students, because you grew up in small towns, somebody gets arrested. Somebody that got arrested, a guy that wrote a bad check 30 years ago, plays in some of the little local poker tournaments here, and he got arrested for writing a bad check, and he still hears about it. He still hears about it to this day, and it still dominates the way people think about him. Get arrested for something in this small town, everybody in the whole community, your family and everybody that knows your family knows about it, and we do not have a lot, and people here tend to be honest. I think when I was a psychology student, the professor talked about a study where they left cars abandoned. And in many of the rural areas, they left the car abandoned for 2 days, nobody ever touched it. In big cities, they stripped them clean. And they put video cameras up, And they have one famous video of a guy who's out walking his baby, sees a car there parked, nobody there, and he steals the battery and puts it in the back of the baby stroller, continues walking on down the road. And big cities, they tend to strip them clean. So people who come from bigger cities, the kind of honesty ethic that happens in smaller towns and smaller communities where there's less crime and where everybody knows everybody is not as common. And you have more problems with thieves. I think some of y'all, if you end up going to a big city, internal theft is the biggest problem that you will face, challenge you will face as a manager, a store manager. And the thing that shrinkage from internal theft is the quickest thing that will end your career unsuccessfully. And it's very, very unfair for you to lose your job because of some low-life thieves, but the company doesn't look at it that way. They look at it as your job not to have any low-life thieves around, or if there are thieves, to catch them. And so we want to try to not hire people who are dishonest, to hire people who are honest. And they're not going to come right out and tell you, of course, in the interview that they're not honest. The final thing, we want to hire people who have an internal locus of control. You may remember this from some of your management classes. Some people have an internal locus of control. They take responsibility for their own actions. They recognize that they made mistakes, and they then try to correct that behavior so they don't make that mistake again. And there are other people who have an external locus of control. A persecution complex is not the same thing, but it's correlated with an external locus of controls. Things happen, in particular when a lot of negative things happen in their life for reasons outside them. It's almost like fate is against them, or people are unfair to them, or people are out to get them, and that's why all these negative things happen. And when things go wrong, they will not accept responsibility. They do not think it's their fault. They think it's bad luck, or I'm cursed in life to have this happen to me. And so this external locus of control is something that we do not want to hire people with an external locus of control. We want to hire people with an internal locus of control. Now the problem here is that people will not come out and tell you in a job interview that they have an alcohol problem, or drug problem. They will not come out and tell you that they're dishonest. And as soon as they get hired, they're going to look around for something to steal. They're not going to come out and say, they're not going to tell you they have an external locus of control. They're going to try to hide their bad attitude. They're going to try to not let you know that they're bossy and demanding. And so they're going to try to hide that from you. They may not be. So our job in the job interview is to try to determine if a person fits in one of these criteria. And I think the test question is going to take a negative valence. And so I'm going to frame my discussion how to not hire somebody who's dishonest, rather than to determine somebody is honest, determine who's dishonest, and then don't hire that person. So I have a negative valence here in this discussion, and it would be better, I think, in life to always have a positive outlook. But I can tell you for a fact that if you make mistakes in hiring and you hire one of these people that we don't want to hire, you will suffer again for it. And so it's very important to try to determine if people have these negative traits, and then to not hire those people. Okay, now, first of all, a person who is dishonest. And I ask students about this in class, and we talk about this. One of the things that they talk about is eye contact. In our culture, and it's a verisimilitude that's been repeated over and over again, it's taken on the force of being the truth, and that if somebody won't look you in the eye, they're lying. Or if somebody, they put their eyes down as they tell you something, that they're being shady or trying to hide something, and that they're lying. When you go to other cultures, though, The eye contact means something completely different. In countries that have a large power distance acceptance, and many of your, for example, your Hispanic countries, particularly in the New World, not necessarily Spain itself, but here in the New World, it is not the custom for lower level people to look into the eyes of the bosses and the supervisors, the managerial class. Those people, those two groups of people are in different classes, and there is a high level of power distance acceptance. It's the same thing in Asia, where you're not allowed to look into the eye of somebody superior to you. Like if the king, nobody can just look the king in the eye, for example, or look the general in the eye. Everybody has to kind of talk down and look this way. And in a situation where you're the boss, they're trying to get a low-level job, in your retail organization, it would be impotent to look them in the eye and to to make a lot of eye contact. It's almost a challenge, an affront to your managerial authority to do that. So when you're dealing with the looking people in the eye, I'm not sure of the truth of that. I don't know if anybody's ever actually studied that. I think many Americans believe it. Even our parents may have said, look me in the eye and tell me you didn't steal those cookies, or you didn't hit you. Look me in the eye and tell me you didn't pull your sister's pigtail. So the parents believe it, and we kind of been conditioned to that. So I'm not sure about that. And particularly when you're dealing with people from other cultures, an unwillingness to make eye contact may be just the way things are done in that culture. So be very careful if you cross international boundaries about putting too much stock in eye contact. Many of you have, and I think many humans have, we have a kind of sixth sense, an almost genetically developed ability to sense mendacity, perspicacity, to sense prevarication, where people are not telling the truth. We for being bullshit. I think the female of the species, in particular, of our species, is particularly good at determining when she's being fed a line by males. And even among males, we know some of the stories we hear in the locker room are not true. We know that they're made up, or they're exaggerated, or that they're not true, and we've learned not to believe everything that we hear when we're in a group of males, particularly maybe some alcohol is flowing and stuff like that, not to believe all that. So we have a sixth sense. I think it behooves you, for those of you who have a fairly well-developed sense of this, and because of my experience as a poker player and stuff like that, I feel like I have a very good sense of this, and I trust my judgment. So trusting your judgment, paying attention to your intuition or your intuitive feel, I think that's one of the things you have to do in this particular situation. It's not going to be 100% accurate, and you got to back it up. Now, here are some other things that you can back it up with. First of all, some companies have paper and pencil measures to determine honesty. They may ask a lot of the questions have to do, have you ever been late returning a library book, or have you ever borrowed a pen and not returned it? Have you ever borrowed a small amount of money and not returned it? If anybody says no, they've never done any of those things, then they feel that they're lying. That's not very accurate either. And I think most people, the problem with paper and pencil measures is that people who are inherently dishonest, who are thieves, they're going to figure out a way to beat that. They're going to figure out what answer you want and give the answer that you want. It's not that hard to do that. So you have to, okay, first of all, the next thing that I would work on that's that paper and pencil honesty test. Ask about the questions on the application or resume. Generally, people who are chronically dishonest also lie on their application, and it may be several weeks, several months since they filled out that application. The things that they may have forgotten what they put on there. So ask a few, So when exactly did you start working for Target? Or what time period was it you said you worked at Kroger? And see if the answers match. So that's one of the ways to determine if the answers match, because they probably forgot whatever type of bovine blank that they put on there so they may not and they may answer wrongly. Watch their action and behavior as they ask these questions. Are they answering right away, directly? In many cases, they may be hesitating and having to think about it, but it's obvious they're trying to come up with when they actually worked there. And many of us, we may have to think about, if you ask me, say, when I worked at Public supermarkets, when I was in high school, I'd have to think about that for a while. What exact period? I'd have to think about it. I'd probably come up with it after a while, but I have to work, okay, I would have started then. And then I would have finished then. So you have these questions to ask, and try to watch their behaviors and as they answer these questions. Okay. Now the final thing is to actually verify some of the information. Whatever information is on and this is not really an interview technique, but whatever information is on the resume, verify that. Actually call the references and check. Do the references unequivocally say good things about them, or do they not? So some sort of verification procedure, and sometimes the company they'll outsource this. There'll be a company that does verification, although that's usually for a little bit higher level employees. It's not usually done for lower level employees. Okay, the next one is poor communication skills. Now, communication skills include listening, speaking, and it also includes nonverbal communication. So, look at their body language. And are they the type of person that has the body language of somebody who's friendly, enthusiastic, likes people, likes to talk to people, is going to be helpful, and empathy, and have some empathic abilities? Are they do they have that kind of body language? Do they have an aura of friendliness, easy to get along with, or do they have a negative aura? Some people, unfortunately, have a really negative aura about their system. And that kind of person, it may just be something else, like the example of Bubba in Forrest Gump. But it may be something that may actually be a very nice and sweet person, but they may not look right. They may not have the look. If you remember Bubba in Forrest Gump, when they first met, Forrest Gump is getting on the bus to go into the military, and everybody's gotten on the bus. It's almost full, and there's one seat open next to Bubba, and everybody's afraid to sit there. And everybody keeps passing him by, and Forrest Gump stops and says, can I have that seat? And it turns out Bubba's a really nice guy, and they get along and all that. So that Forrest Gump story, and I have a tendency to tell it in two different places. The Bubba from the Forrest Gump movie, I have a tendency to tell that in two different places in regular class and everything. So I apologize if I've used that earlier in class and also used it this time. But it's a good point about somebody having really negative body language. It scares everybody when it turns out this is one of the sweetest guys in the world. Other things you can do, first of all, ask open-ended questions. Ask some questions that require them to talk, to communicate an idea or thought. Put them in, give them a scenario. Give them a scenario where they're able to talk to people, or they're able to have to think about something and come up with maybe a solution to a particular problem or something like that requires more thinking, and see how well they communicate that, and whether they have chronically poor grammatical construction and make their verb subject, they disagree and make a grammatical mistake on every sentence that they say, whether their accent is so thick you cannot understand them, that kind of thing. And it depends, of course, if somebody's going to work as a host or somebody's going to work in a job in a retail store where they're just taking people's money and buying things. It may not be as important. Now, if somebody's going to work as a server in a restaurant, they got to have really good communication skills. And so you know, a real big problem if they make grammatical errors or have trouble communicating. Watch for the ability to articulate and get the thought through. Do they have good posture? You know, also some of the body language here, the quirks. They have irritating quirks. You know, they wiggle around, seem nervous, and it doesn't. Some people just they're wigglers. You know, and it doesn't mean they're a bad person, or it doesn't mean that they have poor communication skills, but it does tend to irritate other people. And so little things like that, you know, things like in our culture, if they're an American or a person that, you know, is from a European country, they should make eye contact when they speak to you, have a decent posture when they're in the interview, and all those kinds of things. So that is communication skills. And so if they're missing some of that, or they don't do some of that, then depending on the type of job, and this is one communication skills, really depends on the type of job. You need really high level communication skills for this type of job, a little bit less for this type of job. For some jobs in the retail field, you don't need any communication skills. You know, the people that go out and get the shopping carts out of the parking lot, maybe they don't need really great communication skills. Okay, and now for bad attitude. Now, as we said earlier, you know, one bad apple does spoil the whole bunch. And people who have negative attitudes and who, for whom negativity is their main pleasure in life, hiring these types of people not only have a bad impact on customers when they interact with them, but also it tends to infect the other people in the organization. So it's really important to try not to hire people with bad attitudes. And in some cases, and I don't want to say this is true in all cases, but some people just they're really nice people, they just hold their face in a certain way that gives off a negative impression. But, you know, pay attention to the facial expressions. And in many cases, of course, people with a bad attitude are not going to give it out, although we've got some good little tricks in here to see, you know, to bring this out. One of the things that you can do is put them in a certain situation where you have an angry customer, and then they have to, or an irate customer, and try to figure out what they're going to do about the irate customer. There are some personality tests for this type of thing where you can try to determine if somebody has, you know, a really bad attitude, or they're particularly lacking, this Davis empathy scales, particularly lacking in empathic abilities or something like that. The standard way to do this, if you were taking, say, a human resources class, or you were, you know, taking interviewing training 101, which I'm not sure there is a class like. I think it would be a very excellent class to have, how to interview potential employees. But the stock way to do this is the good boss, bad boss. Ask them about a previous job. You know, I noticed you worked at Home Depot. Let's say you're at Lowe's and you're interviewing. So I noticed you worked at somebody at Home Depot for 3 years, and then I guess you left, went and taught English in Mongolia for a couple years. Tell me about your best boss at Home Depot, and then you know, let them talk about the best boss. Now tell me about the worst boss that you had at Home Depot, and if you have some, if you're because most people have had quite a few part-time jobs. Most people in America start working when they're in high school, and they've had quite a few first-time jobs. If they haven't had any work experience, you know, you're interviewing somebody, say, that played scholastic sports in college, and they weren't allowed to have a part-time job, or were discouraged from having a part-time job. You can ask them about their best professor. You know, notice you studied ETSU. Tell me about the best professor at ETSU, and then after they get done with that, whether it's best boss, best job you've ever had, worst job you've ever had, best professor you had, you know, sometimes they'll say, tell me about the best day you had on your job at Home Depot. Whatever the best is, the key is what happens when you ask them, was the worst boss you've ever had. So you ask them, well, tell me about the worst boss you've ever had. Now, the key thing there is to be right on it as you ask them this. If their pupils dilate and they suddenly become more animated and exciting, because people who have a bad attitude really like to talk about their worst job or their worst day or their worst professor. They don't like talking about good things. They love to talk about negative things, bad things. And so when you ask them, tell me about your worst boss, they get really animated. And where you ask them about their best boss, and they, I had a guy who was really nice and he didn't press you too much, and they weren't that, if they're way more enthusiastic in the answer about the worst boss, worst professor, worst job, whatever the worst is, if they're way more enthusiastic about that, that's a bad sign. I mean, if they really, then you may need to ask another question. You may need to have, something else. Another thing that sometimes interviewers will do is, they'll look at a job that somebody had for a couple months, and I say, I've heard that place is a real disaster. Like you're interviewing somebody and they work at Home Depot, and so you're at Lowe's. You say, well, I heard that Home Depot in there is no Home Depot in Elizabethton. The Lowe's in Elizabethton's a real disaster. Now, you don't even know it's a real disaster or anything like that. Now, if they get too excited about that question, and they can go into a lot of detail about how terrible and how bad they were, now, then that's a bad sign. Now, it may actually be that the management at that place that you're talking about really was bad and it really was a disaster and everything, but if they get too excited, too happy, too animated, talking about negative things versus talking about positive things, that's another one. Another way to do this is to ask why they left their last jobs. Why did So I said, so why did you leave your job here? And if they are always, if they get too critical, too negative about the organization they work for, most of the time for part-time people, they have personal reasons. I got a chance to go work in Disneyland for 3 months and spend the summer in Florida, and it was just, I really liked it. They treated me well, and I really liked that job, and they treated me well. But it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up, so I gave notice and I left. Or I had, I got a chance to do an internship somewhere, and that's the answer you want. You get that kind of answer you want. If every time you ask them this question, you go through, you don't want to ask them 4 or 5 times, but if you ask them once and they give too much negative stuff about that organization, then you ask them about that job and they say, that was even worse. They were such idiots. So that type of thing is a sign that this person you're thinking about hiring may not be a good hire. They may be one of those bad apples that's going to spoil the whole bunch. Now, the final thing, of the 4 criteria for the professor, 3 of which will be on the exam, is the external locus control. What mistakes, remember the external person with the external locus control, we don't want to hire because they don't take responsibility. But they're not going to just come out and tell you they're an external. So here are some of the things that you do. Ask them about the biggest mistake that they made on their last job. Or if they haven't had any, work experience, they're right out of school, what was the biggest mistake you made in your career at ETSU? And if they blame it on other things, that's a bad sign. In other words, people who have an external locus control, things that happen bad to them are because of bad luck, or because in some cases it may even be a little bit of a persecution complex. The forces of the universe, including some of the people, are kind of against them, and the stars are always seem to be aligned against them, and that's why things didn't work out. That's why things went bad. Ask them what they learned from that, and if they really have a hard time, because externals are not used to learning from mistakes, because they don't blame their mistakes on themselves. They don't take responsibility. They don't say, I made a mistake, it's my fault. They may make excuses, or they blame external factors beyond their control for their own poor decisions in life. You ask them that, and they're not used to thinking about that. And it's very clear that, once they go through, that was the biggest mistake, or the worst thing. Ask them, the worst thing that happened to you. And if it's clear that they don't accept any of the responsibility for the worst thing that happened on that job, or they have a hard time understanding that they made a mistake, the biggest mistake was it, but it wasn't really my mistake. They ask for your biggest mistake, not somebody else's biggest mistake, to that person who's being interviewed. So, and they're not used to thinking about what they learned from it, and they have a hard time processing that question. It's very clear. Once again, just like in a bad attitude, it's very important to focus very closely on that person when you switch from the good boss to the bad boss. And look, the pupils dilate, the facial muscles become more animated, the body tone becomes more aggressive. Same thing here, the same thing here for this, only this time when you ask, what did you learn from that, or something like that, then they have trouble processing that. And they're flustered, and they're a little bit processed, and it wasn't really my mistake, so what was I supposed to learn from it? They give that, they may not verbalize that or articulate that, but they give that body language. And so that's really important to look for. Also is something, externals have a very strong agent-actor bias, kind of where if something good happens, they take credit, but they will not take the blame if something goes wrong. So, they may show, you may get them in a situation where, okay, what's the best thing that you ever did there? The biggest accomplishment you had, okay, what was the biggest mistake you had? And the biggest accomplishment was all them, their genius and hard work, or usually just genius is what they want to attribute it to. And if they take too much credit for the good thing, it may provoke them and to show them that they're kind of contradicting themselves a little bit here in terms of this positive, I did it, but negative, somebody else did it. There's also a fate scale. There's also a fate scale, and of course the fate scale is real. It asks questions about what percentage of whether people successful is attributable to their abilities or to luck. And these types of questions. And if they consistently put, most of the people who've hit it big, the people that live in the biggest houses or have the handsome, the girls that have the handsomest husbands, because they're lucky. It's more, luck is more important than hard work, perseverance in life. And so that's one of the things that fate scale attempts to do, although I think it's so easy for people to figure out what's going on with that fate scale. I definitely would not give them that fate scale first. I'd go through the interviewing process and then have them do it. Although typically that's not what happens. You have them fill those things out. If you ask them, like if particularly there's a situation where they left a job in an unhappy situation. Now, of course, the bad attitude person a little bit, it's the same question, but in this case, what you're looking for about why they left their last job is that they blame, like the fact that their hours, they blame things on other people, especially if they were fired or they were let go or they were laid off. Somebody, was laid off from a big company or something like that. And if they blame it all on external factors. Now, sometimes, you're in a union type situation and they lay off the people that were hired last. And it actually is, if you were laid off from a job, it may very well be because you didn't have enough seniority. So you have to be careful, for there may be some honest answers. Sometimes they may be honest in saying that it really was outside their control. But to pay attention to the answer to those questions, particularly for part-time jobs where you don't really necessarily get laid off, but they kind of cut your hours and then you end up not fitting in at that organization and stuff like that. Okay, and now I have finished the professor stuff. And those are the criteria my criteria. So I had those 4 big criteria that I thought were most important. And now I'm ready to move back and talk about some of the criteria that the students have raised in the classes, and some of the, I think you consider it minor criteria, and you'll be responsible for up to 3 of these. For drug, alcohol abuse problems, it's not easy to tell. Sometimes I think you can tell. There's ways that you can tell people who have really chronic abuse. They have, and I don't really want to go into those, but I think you know what I'm talking about, and it's kind of easy to see. For alcohol, you know, the veins in the nose for older people and stuff like that. Although many ex-alcoholics, people who haven't drank in like 16 years and they go to AA meetings all the time. So I hate to put too much emphasis on X. It's the people who currently have problems. One of the things that you can do is ask, you know, tell me how you spend your weekend. You know, what do you typically do? And people will usually be honest, because it's okay to drink in our culture. So they'll be a little bit honest about the fact that they like to have a beer on the weekends. And honestly, you know, if you work in the people who work hard and kind of go aggressively at life, sometimes, you know, having an adult beverage at the end of a long day is not really such a terrible thing. It's when that becomes an abuse. And it's not necessarily that easy to tell, and I don't know what to say. You know, you're hiring somebody to be a waiter or waitress. Are you not going to hire them because they like to have a drink after work? No. It's the abuse problem that is things. If you see gaps in their work history, ask them, what were you doing during this time? If you see several large gaps, now they may have been going to school, they may have taken time off for an internship, you know, may be perfectly legitimate, but ask about that. Pay attention to what they look like, and then kind of ask what they do on the weekends. Now, sometimes they'll, you know, you can ask them, if you saw somebody smoking marijuana outside, would you turn them in? You can ask questions like that, but I don't know. That's, to me, you know, nobody likes a tattletale or an informant, and so do you really want people that are going to be like that? If you could ask questions, if people are not going to be honest about these kinds of things anyway, I think the thing to do is to pay attention to during the work. If people, you know, people come in buzzed, and their eyes are red, and the Visine, they put some Visine in it and it wears off, and they come in with really red eyes, and I know if I go swimming and there's chlorine, after about 2 minutes my eyes become really, really red, and I know it was a couple days I didn't want to go take a swim in the swimming pool before I came in here, because even though I use goggles, I'm afraid that I'm going to get some chlorine in my eyes and it's really red. So there are other reasons why people may be that way, but I think just to pay attention to a little bit of that and to keep your eyes open, because you may not be able to discover this in the interview process. It may be something that comes up later on. Job jumpers who do not admit it on the application, ask them about the gaps. Where are the gaps? In the Employment Act. What were you doing here? What were you doing there? Ask them, are there any other jobs that you had that you didn't tell me about, and things like that. And then at least you've asked them point blank something, and maybe they'll be honest about it. Well, I did work this place. Is there anything else? Yeah, I worked here for a little while, but for a few weeks. And then I hate to tell you, in a situation like that, the people who lie and say no, everything's correct on the application. If you go ahead and hire them, and then don't hire the people that admitted that they didn't have an honest application, I don't know if that's necessarily good. But to try to get them to fill in the gaps, and then at least a lot of times you'll hear people later on say, they forgot to put it on there for 2 or 3 months later, they forgot to put it on their application. At least you've asked them about this and you paid attention to it. So if it happens to come up, that's a customer of mine from the country club. Well, they didn't put they worked on the country club on the application. So at least it may help you to discover it later on. Unkempt, disheveled, dirty, people that are not appropriately dressed. Somebody like me is obviously not appropriately dressed to work at Hot Topics. But if people come in and they're disheveled, they haven't paid attention to the way they should look, and they come into the job interview like that, then what are they going to dress, when they come into work on a day, maybe only the third person's there and they've got a 4-hour shift in the evening. What are they going to come dressed into to work? Are they going to come, somebody that's a waiter or waitress and has dirty fingernails, or their hair hasn't been washed in several days and things like that? It's going to upset customers. So definitely you should be able to visually, you should be able to tell that person's going to be like that. Bossy and demanding. Now you want to ask questions of the person interviewing, to ask persons a question interviewing that you're interviewing, to give them a chance to think, some of the communication issues and things like that. And then you want to give them a chance to ask questions, but if they're too demanding in the questions they ask, can you tell me this, or what happens if this happens, or what is the rule about this? On a previous job, I had a problem with sexual harassment. Is this going to happen, or is that going to happen? And there are people who see harassment of various different sorts. There are white people that feel like they don't get a fair shake because of affirmative action. There are people of different ethnic groups that constantly feel like every time any decision goes against them of any kind, no matter how minor, it's a racial or gender discrimination or some other type of issue. So if there are too many questions related to that, too many questions about if they ask for a night off, can they get it, or too many questions about what happens if this happens, if my baby gets sick, or things like that. Am I going to be able to go home right in the middle of the shift if my baby gets sick? When somebody's baby's sick, and you're the manager, you kind of have to let them off. But if you know that that's going to be an issue and that's going to be happening, they don't have a grandmother, they don't have a babysitter, they don't have a husband or a boyfriend that's going to be able to take care of the baby when they're, in that situation, that person may not be the best person for you to hire, sad as that is, for you to say. So people that act like they are going to have problems, or they're had problems at other jobs and make sure that it's not going to happen. People that are too worried about the way you're going to do things right away, that may be one of those bossy and demanding employees that's going to make your life miserable. So you don't want to hire them. People that are extremely introverted. If somebody sits there at the interview and just says yes, no, and just even and they become, I think people that are extremely introverted sometimes become uncomfortable opening up to people they don't know. And you ask them open-ended questions, and it's clear they don't want to talk about it. They don't really want to talk about themselves. They don't really want to talk about what their favorite hobbies are, what they do on the weekend, or these other types of things. It's clear they don't want to talk about that. They, keeping to themselves. And they have an inclination not to speak or not to communicate, a very strong inclination to speak or not to communicate. That person may not be a very good employee if they're going to be, particularly if they're going to be dealing with customers. They may not be the type of person, honestly, that is going to enjoy or like to be in a job where they deal with other people on a frequent basis, and communication skills are very important. There is a test for introversion, most common. It's one of the dimensions of the most common personality typing schema, the Myers-Briggs inventory. So it's that paper and pencil, but I think it's easy for people to figure that out also. The other thing is that we have some evidence or studies that show that introverts are actually better listeners. So for some types of jobs, like people who work, for example, if you do tax services, they may that person, somebody's introverted, an introverted person, as long as their willingness to be friendly and enthusiastic and they meet some of the other criteria, that they may be a better listener, and that may make them a better employee in certain situations than somebody who's extroverted. People who are not going to be competent for the job, you don't want to hire people who have no skills or anything. Now, you've maybe looked at the job application and they worked at some other jobs. Ask them what they did at the other places. If you really need to hire some good people, even at a fast food restaurant, the people that even the people that make the hamburgers, that's not the simplest job. The guy, it sounds weird, but in many of these places, the guys that make the hamburgers, the people that make the hamburgers, those are actually a step up on the employee scale from the people who do the cleaning up and take out the trash, or even the people who work the front registers. That may be a step up from that level of job. You need to hire somebody, for example, that's going to use the radio at a fast food restaurant and talk to people, take the orders, punch everything in. Ask people what they did at the other jobs. If it always seemed like, they worked at, when they were in high school, they worked at a fast food restaurant, and they did the dishes, and they cleaned up, and they took the trash out, and that's the extent of their responsibilities. And they worked for a grocery store, and the main thing they did at the grocery store was go out and bring the carts in from the parking lot. They didn't run a register, or they didn't manage a section, or they weren't a stock person. They were the kind of person that pushed the carts in. It's like every type of job they've had the very lowest level function, or they've been at the very lowest level of that organization. That may be an indication that they're incompetent. They don't seem to have learned anything from their schooling, in the way they talk and the way they act. People who are not punctual, you do not want to hire people who are not punctual. But the only way to tell, honestly, is if they don't show up. If they show up late for the interview, or you can ask a question like, are you the kind of person that, if you've got someplace to be, that you usually go a little bit early, you go at the last minute, you're always late? Maybe they'll tell you. When you're meeting up with friends, are you the first one there right around the normal time, or are you the last one there? Are you the one that's always calling and say, hey, I'm going to catch up with you in about 20 minutes? You can try that. I don't know if they'll be honest with you. They should surely, if the person sitting across from you has got any sense at all, they should be able to figure that out, but they might not. And if they say, yeah, I'm always late, I'm always the person that's like 20 minutes, I'm the person that's 20 minutes, calling everybody or texting everybody saying I'm going to be there in 20 minutes. If it's maybe they're not going to be punctual. And in many cases, when employees are not punctual about showing up for their shifts, guess who has to stay over or has to work extra? You do. Too many responsibilities outside the job. Ask them about you ask them about their hobbies. Are they involved in, if they're a college student, are they involved in fraternities, sororities? Are they involved in any clubs? Now, normally these extramural activities, these kind of extra activities are thought to be a good thing. It actually, many, if any of y'all are students and you were in student government, or you work for the school newspaper, or you student athlete, you may have learned as much from these outside activities, you think anyway, as you did in a lot of the, remember as much things that really helped you in life as you got from the classroom experiences that you had. So it's really a good thing when they do all that. It's just when somebody has too many other responsibilities. They have a baby, there's no grandmother, there's no, there's no dad around, or if they're dad, there's no mom around, and they have all these other responsibilities outside the job. That person may not make the best employee. Now, may not make the best employee. Now, on the other hand, if somebody is a single mom, single dad, don't have much education, they don't have a lot of other opportunities, they don't want to be on welfare, they want to work and make a living, usually that person needs money and needs their job. And they're going to do, if they've got a grandmom or somebody like that, or the other person is around, they share custody or at least get some help from somebody else, an aunt or an uncle, that person may be one of your best employees. I mean, they may be the kind of person you call up on Friday night when 3 other people have called sick and say, hey, would you like to come in and earn a little extra money? And they'll drop everything and go there because, a single mom, single dad, young single mom, single dad, they need that job and they need the money. So, so there's the corollary to too many responsibilities. Also, a lot of times people who have a lot of different things going on in their life, they're in the student government and they volunteer. They're one of the people, they're a host for freshmen at Pride Week, and
They do. Sometimes those are the kind of people who really they are able to do that because they've organized their life well. They're good time managers, and they segment off all the different responsibilities they have. So you may get a sense, and you may try to get a feel for, is it that kind of person? And in many cases, that may be your best employee. But you know, you get a sense, is it that kind of person, or is it somebody that's got all these different things going on, and they're never going to come in and work a few extra hours when you need somebody? They're always going to be, you know, needing an extra Friday night or weekend night off because they got to go somewhere for this activity or go somewhere for that activity. So too many responsibilities outside the job. Okay, and now that is the end of Module 10.